So, Ravi, thank you so much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But
Well, thanks very much, Nick. Very glad to be here.
it's great to have you on the show, Ravi. And before we walk into the future, can you please share a little bit about your background? Where did you grow up?
Right. So I grew up in Durban on the east coast of South Africa. And I grew up in during apartheid. So it was the last years of apartheid, I would think, the last decade or so, 2 decades there. And I grew up in a very political family. So I come from a family of political activists. And my father was one of the local leaders in the anti-apartheid movement, called the United Democratic Front, UDF.
Right.
And in fact, he had been arrested and charged with high treason. And he was one of the on trial for years, and he was a lawyer. So I come from a background where, on my father's side, a lot of them were lawyers, or in some activist organization, many of them. So
Right.
that's how I grew up. And my mother was a teacher. And when my father was arrested, at the time, he was the president of something called the Natal Indian Congress, which was an associated member of the UDF. Because the UDF was a whole lot of organizations that together, formed something across all racial barriers to oppose apartheid. So as resistance was building up to apartheid, the apartheid government come to arrest all the leaders as a preemptive strike. So my father was a lawyer, and he would. So when I was in school, I knew that I would go and see him in court on trial. And of course, yeah. So and then my mother, then schools were all public sector schools. This was in the 1980s, and then so she was retrenched or fired because of my father's activities. So even if she didn't want to be a political activist, she had no choice.
And
And yeah, and then my father's brother was also quite involved and ran the ANC office in London.
right.
So that's how I grew up. And yeah, I ended up doing. So I was the one person in the family who did not want to go too deeply into politics because I'd seen all these very clever lawyers end up in jail or in exile, and none of them made any money. And someone had to pay bail. So as I was growing up, uh, I thought maybe if I did something which, at least could pay bail for the rest of the family, that would be a good thing. And that's how I ended up doing something in economics and finance and as well as law. Yeah.
Well, in a sense, you're still a development activist, if I may say so, today.
Yeah. Yeah. You
And
can't get away from your background. That's the one thing I've learned. There is something in your DNA programming that always takes you back towards the same sort of things. I think I've moderated it, uh, but I ended up yeah. So I was very keen on chess, by the way, and thinking through how things work in the future. So when I was in school, I ended up being the South African chess champion for schools in South Africa.
yeah,
Yeah, and so I always like to think ahead and plan ahead and see where things are going. And that's why I did a BCom economics and law. But I realized when I'd finished my first degree that at that point in time, this was now the early 1990s, that perhaps where my skills and interests were more useful would be in research for the trade union movement. So my move from with my commercial and economics background ended up being a researcher for the trade union movement, which was very involved at the time in negotiating in the early 1990s all the new, like the changes at sector level an economic level. So I ended up being in that process, and I suppose that then took me to where I am today, more through the impact space.
And Ravi, can you tell us who inspired you in your early days?
Um, well, I think I was very inspired by people who I would think across the board, I came across many very brave people who were trying to change the rules of society to make society function in a better way. And it was a little bit unique because remember, in when I graduated, which was 1992, with my first degree, the country was on the cusp of a momentous change where everything was going to be reformed. You could already feel it in the air. The legal frameworks, economic structures, there was a lot of change. And right across the board, there were a number of people you could see who were so there was a lot of change in the air, and I was very motivated by, and even globally. Remember, in 1990, early 1990s, the globe Berlin Wall had collapsed. There were so many momentous changes across, and I just could see that here is, a historic moment for changes to happen. And my father, by that time, who I think did influence me quite a bit, uh, but he had come almost towards the end of his career then, and but I could see that people had fought for many things, but almost the baton had passed now to lots of the people that were young in these positions, in 20s and 30-year-olds at that point were coming out of the activist movement and they were becoming very senior in different things. And so I took inspiration from a lot of people who maybe were, 10 years older than me, but still in their 30s, early 30s. And I was looking at a lot of young activists and, uh, and I think I found that whole movement quite inspirational. That there are opportunities, there are windows of opportunity in history where things can change, and uh, I was getting a chance to come through that window at that time, and I found that very exciting at the time. So yeah.
Now, Ravi, you've been leading many prominent initiatives in South Africa to reform and transform key sectors of the economy. Today, you're leading the country's largest youth employment scheme. Yes. Looking back over your career, would you say there was a turning point or maybe a number of turning points?
Yeah. So if I was to look at um, how my career has evolved, and let me just say this, I have, as I said, the first job I had was as a 21-year-old advising general secretaries of trade unions on wage negotiations. So my first job, I had only been working for 3 months, and I was advising 50-year-old general secretaries of big trade unions on how to do their wage negotiations because I was the economist in the room, right? So it was very strange. And then at the age of 25, I was the director of the think tank for COSATU, a place called Naledi. So I was already sitting in big negotiations, and people will turn to me in the boardroom and say, what does the technical head have to say on how many public holidays South Africa should have based on its economic consequences? And there I was at 25. So I proposed 12 days based on some research I'd done, and we ended up with 12 days. So it was, or so so I worked with trade unions, and then later on, when I had at mid-career, I then went and worked in government, and I ended up heading up a division of DTI, and I went on to the development bank, and now, as you say, with Yes, for the last 7 or 8 years, I did a lot of work with fund management, and now with Yes, which is more private sector. So I've worked with trade unions, government, and private sector. And you could say, well, here's a person who has worked with different key stakeholders. So it's not the stakeholder that is the common thread. So what is the common thread? And all of these jobs are very impact focused jobs. So when I was in trade unions, the trade unions were a big force for change. And one of the first things I had to do is I was the person leading from the trade union side the restructuring of the pension fund laws. Right. So at the age of 24, I was the technical head working with the two young MPs, a woman called Jill Marcus, who became the governor of Reserve Bank, and then she was an MP, and another woman called Barbara Hogan, who was an ANC MP from Cape Town, also became a minister of public enterprise many years later. But then there were MPs, and I had to, and we proposed to them, why is it that the pension funds, where the money is really deferred wages of the workers, why do the workers not have any role on the trusteeship of their own money? Because the companies are misusing their money. And as you know, pension funds own the economy. Pretty much 60% of the stock exchange is owned by pension funds. So it was changing the rules around pension funds, which could then change the way pension funds interact with companies, which would then change the way companies interact in the economy with workers. At the time, the focus was on workers and worker rights, but it's also things like now what we call ESG. So that changed the pension fund law. It was a pension fund amendment bill of 1995. It was hugely transformative because I thought it was wheels within wheels. Once the pension funds change who's informing their decisions, that the mandates from them to the investors to the companies will be a seismic change across. So that was very transformative. And then I got a chance then to also change because of the trade union background, the restructuring of the unemployment insurance fund, which is now getting again further into jobs. And like I say, everything was changing, and there was a three-person team appointed by the Minister of Labor at the time. Tito Mboweni was the Minister of Labor. There was one person from business, one person from labor, and one academic. So I was the labor rep put into the technical team. And the UIF at the time was going broke. It didn't include domestic workers and a whole range of things. And we said, well, why are rich people using the UIF as a way to take money out for holiday? So you resign, take your money out and go on holiday. But the UIF has no money to include the most vulnerable workers like domestic workers. So we changed the funding schedule in the UIF to say spread it towards the lower end. And then suddenly 800,000 domestic workers could now be included for the first time in the UIF. So that was the change where the UIF for the first time covered the poorest workers in the country, which was very much the South African transformatory thing. So that was good. And then later on when I was in government, and I ended up with um, again, I'm looking for sectors which could be transformatory. And I remember when I went to the DTI, there was I was very excited about film and TV because how you see the country in a film, will make people want to come to the country as tourists, which is a huge industry. But first, you got to see the rolling hills. You know, think of New Zealand. Lord of the Rings is shot, and people see in New Zealand, they see the rolling hills, and they all want to come and visit New Zealand. So when you see, like behind you now, I can see Cape Town, the 12 Apostles at your screen. People look at that and say, oh, wow, where's that? Oh, it's Cape Town. Beautiful. I should go there. I've never seen anything as pretty as that. So film and TV gets to represent the country to other people, but also to themselves. So Africans look at that picture behind you, Nick, and they're like, wow, this is truly a beautiful country. I feel good about making this country better. So then we looked at the idea was, is there a way to promote that industry as a catalytic industry? And at the time, we had an incentive in DTI. I just walked in that month and I saw, because I knew a lot of filmmakers, I was thinking about film, and I saw we had an incentive which was 25 million Rand, mainly targeting foreign filmmakers, but you could make three movies, but if your costs were above 25 million Rand, you could claim a rebate. And I thought all the local producers can't access that because they don't make 25 million Rand productions. Why didn't we create a lower one? So all the people who are making local films while they're waiting for, Blood Diamond with Leonardo DiCaprio to be shot here, they can still be supported while we wait for the big productions come in, so you can eat in the meantime. You know, you can make things for the South African Broadcasting Corporation. So then I managed to force my way in to take over that team, at least for the point of view of building the next part of the incentive. And it created a second tier rebate for local producers at a lower threshold. And it became very important for the independent producers in South Africa to keep busy, in between the big feature films from overseas. So I thought that was very interesting because it's a small but very catalytic industry. And it wasn't a hard thing to do. It was just the opportunity wasn't being grasped. And then when I went to DBSA, again, we were hosting at the time the COP17, which was the climate change conference. And where all the international partners come, they move from country to country. And this was in Durban. It was 2010 at the time. And I was then the group executive for planning at the Development Bank of Southern Africa. And so we thought that was a time that we should really push for green funds. So Africa had no green fund. And we thought, why don't we can see internationally the Chinese and Americans are not going to agree on the global fund, but we are the host country. So it's going to be a bit of a damp squib because they're all going to come here and there's going to be no agreement. And everyone's going to say, this is a failed conference. So we prepared as a backup that South Africa would launch its own fund at the event. So the South African National Green Fund. And we will tell the world, you know what, you guys can't get your act together. See what we can do. And at the time, load shedding had already started. So there were already going to be big renewable projects. And DBSA at the time was doing loan finance to at least 13 of the 27 REAP projects, renewable energy IPPs. And we thought that DBSA will be the fund managers. It's perfect. It was a win-win. I also look for win-win. So there's like DBSA will be the fund manager for a new national fund, which will encourage a lot of local production in the green space. And it will give South Africa a chance to show the world what could be done. And obviously, we need to deal with load shedding. So it came to pass, and maybe this is some of my chess planning ahead, that many months later, when the event happened, there was no agreement between the Chinese and Americans. And then we slipped the proposal to the Minister of Finance at the time, and we said, you should make this announcement because everything is prepared with your Treasury team and DBSA, which was under National Treasury, and the Department of Environment Affairs. We all propose this structure. Everything is ready. Just announce it. So he went and announced it as a South African Green Fund that would seed many localization programs within the big green energy rollout. And that became the National Green Fund for quite a few billion rand. And many of our local components now were seeded by that because it was technology, local governments, and natural resource management. So again, it was trying to look for opportunities where some of that could be taken forward. And then I've worked on a whole range of other things, from the restructuring of social security. The child support grant was the thing that I worked on as well, and a number of things. So, but unfortunately, at that point, what happened was around 2012, the Zuma administration was in full flight, and that put paid to my career in the national public sector because it was very dangerous for independent, fairly outspoken executives who are not scared of politicians to be there because you would be targeted because I would be the one who would tell a minister, no, you can't do that. And they'll be like, who are you to tell me I can't pocket the money or whatever? So they didn't really want inconvenient senior people around. So at that point, I did leave the national public sector, thankfully too, because it only got worse for all of those from 2012 until 2016. That was the state capture year. So I had left the government because I could see that was already happening. And then, sometimes life is very interesting because then I went into fund management because where can a person with impact interest go if not in government. So, having worked in development finance, I then worked a lot on ideas and concepts around raising of private capital that could have an impact. And given again my interest in impact, a lot of it was on the impact investment side. And that led me then to Yes, because I had then worked on the establishment of things which are today called township economy funds. And like how would we get to the base of the pyramid, people and communities where a lot is happening, but it's not being picked up. So, there's a whole lot of things we can talk about there. But having done that, it was quite successful for quite a while. And I did some contract work building things at local government level. Um, and one of them was, in fact, being very involved in youth employment, because again, that's very catalytic. So if you want to see, for example, how to make, a country future-proofed, you need to deal with youth. So I'd worked on things which today are called Harambee. So I was part of the team that did some of the discussion on that, but more from an external point. And I had worked on things which were then part of the initial, what should I say, conceptualization of Yes, because Yes, when it started, was also looking at base of the pyramid. So I was already involved from the ideas point of view, but not in the operational structures part of it. And then when during COVID, the Youth Employment Service, or YES program, was now trying to recover from COVID, and they were looking for a CEO, the board then approached me and said, "Look, uh, would you be interested?" And then when I looked at YES, I thought, well, okay. I mean, I obviously knew a lot about it, but it was I could see immediately the huge potential. Um, just given the opportunity for it to become a leading public-private partnership in what is probably one of the most catalytic and critical spaces. So I just jumped at that. But the common thread throughout this very long story is whether it's pension funds that could influence change down the road, or it's a green fund that can seed new technologies in what then became South Africa is one of the leading green like renewable uh, countries in the world, actually,
Yeah.
to, I think cutting edge ways in which corporates can work with youth to build the future. All of those, it's really coming out with impact models and changing the rules. So if I go back to my childhood, I think, I'm not so much a rule breaker as a rule changer.
Right.
And and these things are always there. I'm like, well, what if we change the rules in this way? Wouldn't that be more impactful? And so that has been my common thread. And so it's still the way my brain works.
Now, Ravi, can you tell us what is driving you today? What is motivating you? What is energizing you every day?
Yeah. Yeah, so as you can tell, I am a little bit energized on some of the issues because um, I think the world, again, there's a lot of change happening. So if you step back, again, we see that there is a very rapid pace of change happening globally. There are countries which are getting introducing and adopting new technology, um, whether it's AI, whether it's robotics, uh, uh, you know, uh, I mean, whether it's even like biological changes in terms of now you can actually incorporate DNA and genetics and all of that into things. Um, there is it's almost like the world has now discovered fire. It's like it's a massive change from what was before, right? We have got things now that can be cognitive, which humans used to have that as their one thing. You know, you can have a hammer that thinks. That's quite different. And there are countries which are going to adopt that and find ways to use it, and they're going to accelerate very fast. in a good way or a bad way. And there are countries which are going to be very slow to adopt that or do that in a completely wrong way, and they're going to go the other way. So, South Africa, to me, what is exciting for me is we are sort of in the middle. South Africa has a lot of the technological ability to be in the Premier League in this process. Um, and we could even be very influential in that process because we are always thinking about how to use technology also to do things better. So Africa still has the behavior of someone who can compete, but is also thinking about equity and fairness and how to make the world a better place, not just make more money. So even if we were in the Premier League, we would be a voice of reason and conscience and positive transformation. So that'll be the best scenario. Or if we do it wrong, we would just be left behind. And in that process, who is going to help us as a country negotiate through that? It's going to be the 20 somethings today. It's going to be the people finishing school today. It's going to be the people still in their 30s today, right? Because they are going to be the ones who, in the next 20, 30 years, have to take the story out. So that's where when I look at the Youth Employment Service, it's not about giving a young person a job. Public works can do that. The economy must grow to give people jobs. What we're trying to do is say, if there's 50,000 people a year, really bright people who otherwise wouldn't get this chance, how do we ensure they get the chance because they're super bright, but they really ensure as a country we have like a full team on the field that can help us have this influence, right? So let's just find, societies that have broad-based empowerment do better. Societies that only depend on the children of the lords and ladies,
Sure.
they keep using swords for 1,000 years. No one ever invents anything new because they just keep. And not all the lords and ladies' children are going to be the brightest sparks. They're
Sure.
just there because daddy and mummy, or
Yeah.
granddaddy and grandmummy were the ones. So you always develop, if you think about the US in its best history, was bringing in smart people who can, work together. So South Africa, it's the same thing. Can we get as many people from whatever background into the game? And that's what excites me is with the Yes program, because it combines a mandate from the public sector to be transformative. It's a presidential initiative, but it's entirely private sector led. So the boards are all the people who founded the top banks in the country, the head of the stock exchange, people leading sustainability programs, and we have so many of the key CEOs involved. Many of them are very committed, like me. Some of them even lecture me about the need for transformation. It's quite funny. Uh, so we do bring together quite a good group of business people, and I think, well, okay, we're bringing together probably the best of the business leadership that is keen on positive change. And we've got a very supportive president, and we're bringing in a lot of bright sparks. This is the biggest youth employment program funded by the private sector in the world.
Wow.
There's no program around the world that has 45,000 young people fully paid for uh, by the private sector. You can have a bigger program like a government funded program, but this is different. It's private sector. So we have Microsoft coming to us and saying, can we train everyone in AI certifications, and they pass an exam, they get an actual certificate. We have corporates saying, okay, can we support your top entrepreneurs and make them suppliers to our corporations? Can we support people in the digital, economy or the green space? So even though we are limited by the fact that corporate can only pay so much, but let me tell you, 45, 50,000 people a year, full time for the whole year is a lot.
Mm.
And so what can we do every year with this group that hopefully many thousands of them, not all of them, obviously, but even if 10,000 out of the 45,000 go on in 5, 10 years to be quite influential or important in their company or as an entrepreneur, or maybe some of them will end up in government involved in the regulation of AI, how impactful will it be to have 10,000 really smart people going out into South Africa every year, linked to the private sector, doing good things in this country and the continent, and obviously through that, hopefully globally. So that's very exciting. So yes, is so what we're doing, we're actually curating partnerships in different key sectors. So we sit with, PEPESA, which is your global business services. We're sitting, looking at what we can do. We sit with, so we're literally now running the AI Skills Hub for Africa with Microsoft. As I
Mhm.
said, 50,000 people. We are working on the green transition programs. What people coming out of TVET colleges can be upgraded or wherever they go from universities and put through it. So they go into the renewable space, working in EVs or, sort of ultra thin solar PV panel developments, the Tourism Business Council, how many looking at how would we profile online places that would otherwise never be found, to the world. We are running the biggest program for young drone pilots in the country, right? Become qualified pilots because if you look at that scenery behind you, a lot of that will be captured by drones, which again goes back to film or it goes to smart agriculture. So you know, and also so we're looking at all of that. And the last thing I'll say on that, why it's exciting, so if I just take the drone example. So as I said, we are running the largest program for drone pilots. One of our pilots finished 3 years ago getting his pilot's license. He's now the head of operations for a big drones company. He is now overseeing the next 50 pilots that come from ES. So he's in charge. He's like the alumni, and he's going back to from the class of 3, 4 years ago. He's helping the new class, uh, and he works, and his drone business works with supporting the mining industry to do much smarter, safer, blasting in mines. They do the security and the protection of long distance infrastructure. They oversee a lot of the work for film and TV, as well as now we are introducing South Africa, one of the first countries, very smart agriculture, where the drones are involved in ensuring that pesticides and happen at the right part in the field at the right time. You can only do that with technology. So it's helping a whole range of industries advance on a technological space. So it's like a perfect thing where it's a great job, it's great for the country, and this is someone who's now creating a bigger capacity for us to impact in the future with more people who can do that. So we
Thank you.
configure things that can play that role.
So in a way, Ravi, you're building the leaders of tomorrow, the leaders of the future, right?
That's right.
Now, looking into the future, Ravi, what does the future of leadership mean to you?
So I would say, so the future of leadership, and I suppose, what's common with leadership now and in the past is you have to have a vision uh, of where you are leading people towards. They say you can have a map, but more important than a map is a compass. You kind of, because you don't always know what you're going to come across, but you must be able to you have to have some clarity of thought as to what you're trying to do. Like I can't tell you which industry is going to be great or which person in our program is going to be great or exactly what's going to happen in the future. But I know we need a lot of people who are very motivated to move the country in the right direction and who are prepared to be brave. Because in the end, whatever change you're going to make, there's going to be a lot of people who want to stop that for bad reasons, or maybe just because, their KPIs say something else. But if you so I think you do need a lot of people with vision and who are brave enough to forge ahead with that. And yeah, and I think one of the other things I would say that is very important because it's not only about an individual because the challenges are so um, so a pervasive and persistent, um, that you have to be able to be someone who can build collaborations and coalitions. Because it's very hard as an individual. So even the things I'm talking about, in every case, I would have had to have mobilized other people to help me, and many of them would be smarter than me on that issue, right? Because if I was working pension funds, I could see the opportunity of, you know, pension funds that are more accountable and more focused on having a long-term impact are better. But I'm not the pension fund lawyer, right? I'm not the pension fund lawyer. I'm not the one who had been giving mandates for 30 years. So I had to mobilize those people to say, okay, if this is what we're trying to do, legally, how do we structure new legislation to do this? And if we wanted to get people to buy into that, and they already have a different approach and they have different contractual arrangements, how would we make this happen institutionally? Right? Because I think so. I'll say collaboration, and I think the third thing. So it's about vision being brave. It's about collaboration, and I think the third thing we do need to understand institutional environments. By which I mean you and I can have a great idea, or the country makes mistakes where they have a policy, and it's like, okay, you can have a policy, but what is happening on the ground that makes this policy not possible now? So if you propose a great idea, maybe it's not the first time someone has proposed that. So what is different this time that you think this idea is going to work? Because, you know, almost certainly someone else had that idea before, right? It's not always a new idea. So you have to understand, and this is where I did have a failed PhD in the sense that I gave it up. I was too depressed. But my PhD, which I'm halfway through, I suppose, but I'm halfway through, but I stopped it 10 years ago during the years of state capture. I was looking at how the formal process of making decisions interacts with the informal. So we agree on a policy, but somehow it doesn't happen because the institutions and what's there, there's a way in which it pushes back. And you need to, so it's always why I think I've been quite successful in the things I've done. I've spent a lot of time understanding the institutions and how they work. So I think, especially now, if you're going to do something globally, there's a lot of organizations globally on that issue which work the way they work, and they've been doing that for 100 years. So if you don't know how they interact, your great idea is just going to be a lovely speech at a forum and nothing will happen. So you have to go into understanding how Nick's programs and Ravi's programs and Wendy's programs, whatever it is, how they work in practice and what makes people do what they do. So if you're really going to have that progress, you must be able to find a pathway that, win-wins as much as possible.
Mhm.
So you isolate, the last barriers. And I think that because the danger is you would have a lot of leaders, so-called, who are playing to social media galleries and all of that and saying things, but there's a gap between what people are saying and what's happening.
Mhm.
And I think that's very dangerous. Um, so I think if you really, so one of the things is how would you have, authentic leadership on things where there actually is going to be a connection between things they're saying and what gets implemented. So I think that's probably one of the more difficult things now because it's so much easier to make statements
Mhm.
and then promise things, but then the reality can be very different because you're just playing in the social media space. You're just playing in the publicity space. So I think one of the challenges in the future of leadership is how do you have something that is more authentic as opposed to something that is almost just like virtue signaling or where you're um, I mean, because obviously you can go a long time, being very demagogic and promising and, you know, targeting the right things based on opinion polls. You're always associating with the popular views, but that's very dangerous. I think that's very dangerous. So I would say that's probably
Thank you.
key.
Thank you, Ravi. I think you should write a textbook for future leaders because clearly these are critical competencies. Now, these are challenging times, and as the world is stumbling from one crisis into the next, what is your advice for future leaders in terms of challenges? How should they tackle career challenges in a way that they can overcome these challenges?
Yeah. I think based on my own limited life experience, I would suppose, because I've read a lot about leadership. I think I'm trying to study leadership from a point of view of how I can be a better leader, but I'm not the professor of leadership. But I would say the one thing about that I find very useful for me is for is to actually understand yourself first, right? If you don't understand yourself and what motivates you and why you tend to do things in a particular way like this and not like that, you it becomes harder. So I think the first thing is to have a lot of self-awareness. And I know my wife might laugh if she hears me saying this, because men are never self-aware. Uh, but I do think seriously it is very important because then I also know why I respond to certain things in certain ways, right? What triggers me in certain ways, I know, and then I also know what draws me there, and I have a better idea of from my own background, my own programming. So I think the first thing is this, is you must know yourself. I think that helps. Then you can manage your own actual interactions. I think I've also I've thought a lot about what it is I'm trying to do because there is a danger, as I say, that you could be so caught up in strategies and all of that, you don't actually know what you're trying to do and that's where I say it's sometimes better to have a compass than just a map because a map you're always going to end up in a different place. And so I think what it also actually having a clarity as to what it is you're trying to do and why that's important in your world view. Then I would say the third is you need to be an expert on something. Right. So you do need to develop an expertise because there's nothing worse than, someone who really doesn't know enough of the details or the institutional environment, whatever, trying to make big changes because it's like you haven't done the research, but you are a fan trying to do the job of the national coach. It's like, well, yeah, everyone has an opinion and you're there in your armchair with a strong opinion, but you're not the expert, right? You haven't done enough of it yourself. You can't be in that player's shoes because you don't know, you've never done it. So if you've never done it, there's a limitation of how you can tell other people who are in the process of doing it what they should or should not do, right? There's a limitation. So I do think it is very important to have deep expertise. I think one of the challenges then, if you look at, for example, ministers, I always find it interesting to say, if you're a minister or a senior person, that's okay. You can be a politician, but what is your track record of having built a thing like this, which has worked? So if you can show me you've done this 3 times before, 10 times before, and now you're in charge of a place that's doing it, I'm like, okay, well, this person has a very successful track record in something similar. I trust they will make good judgment calls. But if you can't, it's harder. So I think it's the same thing in your career. People are looking to see, well, in the past, what did you do that actually worked that makes you a credible person to say something? So I think it is important to build actual credibility on actual successes as of being opposed to someone who's just a good talker. And I don't think we need good talkers. I mean, it's important to be a good communicator, obviously, but there can be, again, an overemphasis on communication. But I do think communication is important. Maybe the last thing to say that where you have to, if you're going to be successful, you do have to be able to and win people over. You have to be able to make a very clear case to bring people over, which is both why this is a good thing to do, why technically it's the right way to go about doing it, and to also make sure people feel connected to the issue. So beyond logic and reason, they feel in their heart this is a good thing. So, when we do the youth employment service thing as well, we try to show people, like technically why it's good to have skills in a particular sector, but also connect how they themselves, as senior people, someone gave them a chance,
Right.
right? And because of that chance, you got into that scholarship program or whatever it is, you went forward. But if you didn't get that chance, you could be somewhere very, very different and not as good. And and that's how then, we find CEOs will be like, oh, yeah, even though my lifestyle might have been quite different and my life path might have been quite different, even in their own environment, there was something that sparked this path. And okay, so they want to be the spark for other people as well. And then, so even if a CFO then comes and tells them, oh, it's very expensive to do, that CEO or the chairman of the board remembers, you know what, actually, no. I remember when I was in Germany or whatever it is, it cost a lot of money, but the person came, I got this chance, and today I'm having such a big impact because of that. So this is how it works. And yeah, so I think being able to have all those things, I think would be very important components of leadership.
Thank you. Now, Ravi, as a mentor to many future leaders, can you share a success story or two where you mentored an upcoming leader and that person took your advice to heart?
So let me think about this. So obviously, um, I've worked with many very good people, and as I said, in my 20s, I was doing something that a 20-year-old should not be doing, which was managing a lot of 50-year-olds. And so some of the people who were, let's say, in my age bracket at the time and grew up with me, and I was their boss. Uh, but I do look and see many of them went on to do very, very good things. I'm not sure how much of that would be because of me, but I would say, um, the I don't know if I'm going to name names, but I would say someone who and I'm always looking for people uh, who whose judgment I trust ultimately. So the person I will take on as the mentee and who's working closely with me is ultimately a person who I know if I'm not in the room and the situation, whatever it was, appeared to them, they would act and behave in a way and take decisions in a particular way that I can trust. So I think it's the one person who I went on and in fact worked for me for over 10 years. And as I went from organization to organization, he would join and be quite important. And then he went on a couple of years ago to be the acting CEO of the IDC and a very, very capable person who when we started, we were both young activists and with some economic background, um, but uh, doing a lot of sector development work, getting a lot of exposure quite early on. So he ended up then being the head of operation. Um so I want very very good to see, and yeah, so there've been quite a few people like that across the board. Um, yeah, that I've
Thank you.
played. I don't want to name them because I haven't.
Sure.
I would have to ask them first before I
Understand.
before I divulge all the things. But I come across a lot of people who worked in organizations where I was leading it, and uh, and because in a way, I suppose there was a selection bias, I would work with people who gave me that impression that they were committed to the long haul. They would get a lot of exposure. They would go to things that they're also quite young, and you know, uh, I would see a lot of my work colleagues, or let's say mentees, uh, doing, and a lot of them in fairly similar impact programs. So if I look at the green transition programs, or I look at the people running some of the uh, other transformation programs, I think I see a lot. The unfortunate thing, though, is that given the problems in the States over these last few years, and that is tragic, a lot of the people who went in, the environments were very hostile, as I said, to independent, capable people, and they decided, and they left, and they went into, private sector and so on. But I think it's still possible to rebuild the states in that way by having. I mean, there are a lot of people out there who would come in, and so it happens that I do still see a lot of my old network who are now. I think the impact space really does soak up a lot of uh, progressive technical skills, who are almost waiting for the public sector to to be a welcoming space. So I gave the example of the IDC because the IDC, I think, is one of the few institutions that has remained quite solid, and where technical people can still find a home.
Now, Ravi, looking back over your own leadership career, are there any role models of leadership whom you have encountered and maybe worked with who you would recommend the future leaders should learn from?
Ooh, yeah, sure. That's an interesting one. So, let me see. And I suppose in the private sector globally, I did like people like Richard Branson. Okay, I did like people like Richard Branson because they were trying to do things differently, and I found that quite inspirational, and I did have a chance to connect to some of the work they were doing, and he was very close to South Africa. I would say I was, I mean, internationally, in terms of policy, I worked very closely with Professor Vivian Taylor. And Vivian Taylor set up the thing called the Taylor Committee that restructured Social Security. And what I liked about her is, just tireless commitment to social change. And she worked with Amartya Sen at that time. She was the deputy to Amartya Sen. And so I liked the way in which policy from a high level would move down. And she was a very calm person, so very not like Richard Branson. She was a very calm working at policy. So it was the other side about one is very practical, and the other is the policy, but the two connect together. Um, I think if I think about Yes now, I mean I work very close to the Yes board is particularly effective. I really enjoy it. Uh, so I've got there in the board Stephen Kosef, who I rate very highly. He's a founder of Investec, and he's in his 70s now. He's very active on a number of boards, but also that you can make big decisions fast. I think that's one of the things. You can't be sitting there like you haven't thought about it. It's going to take a long time. You have to really have an instinct. You must in your head have a set of rules as to how would Nick deal with this situation when it happens and he has to make a decision in 10 seconds. He already knows in a situation like this, I'm going to do that. If someone is untrustworthy, don't employ them. You know, if so you already know. It's like there's no way. I'm not going to you know, just mess around with that issue. I already know I don't trust the person. I can't hire them. Doesn't matter how clever they are. That's my, um, and I think so. I think I would say I work a lot with Colin Coleman, who is also on the board, and again a very fast and very clear decision maker, which helps. Of course, he and Stephen don't always agree. That makes me the third person in fashion as a CEO with the board members. There's people like Leila Fourie, who is the CEO of the JSE, who's excellent, and also thinking through long-term sustainability regulations and how to balance, a whole range of companies and in the South African economy with global standards. So you can't raise standards so much higher than what local can bear. Um, and yeah, so I think I've got Simon Sussman on the board, who's actually my mentor as well, and all these board members. I use all these older, well, not Layla, but people who had far more experience. I draw in as much advice. So Simon used to be the CEO of Woolworths, and he's on my board, and he runs my HR committee, and very again someone who I think one can follow. I'm not sure how public all this stuff, but Simon, I mean, they all give lectures and they all do things, but it's very where you combine. You can see the person has had huge success, right? All these companies I mentioned, Goldman Sachs, Investec, JA, Woolworths, there are people who have had a huge. I'm very interested in people who have had a lot of success, have maintained a lot of integrity and have a good reputation, and are quite accessible in terms of giving feedback on how they make decisions. So I'm very interested in the science of making decisions because I think you can be very clever, but you have to, at the end, bring that information and knowledge and networks to a point where you make a good decision rather than a bad decision. And how do people do that under very difficult circumstances? And whether it's the people on my board I mentioned, or whether it's someone like Professor Vivian Taylor, who was the ministerial advisor and advisor to Martin, and on the UN policy side, they're all working to make decisions within particular environments which they think would have very important consequences. I find that really fascinating. And so I would, uh, if I was to pick people that a young South African or whatever should from whatever jurisdiction wants to learn from, it's people who have really good track records, um, and to understand how they thought about getting from point one to the final point where now it's fully successful, because that is a case study in itself for what we all do, right? Whether it's a small issue or a big issue, we all are trying to plot through these new lots of challenges, and how do you make that decision? Because it's not that it's not like only some people can do it. I think most people can learn how to do that. And it's just, I think, that skill, but learning it from practitioners like that, not necessarily the most famous person in the world. Like Richard Branson, obviously, because he's done so much, he's written about it, and he's spoken about it, and he's very connected to South Africa. And we've done some programs together here. But um, I think a lot of them will be people accessible to you, to us in our environment. I think would be very interesting.
Thank you. Now, Ravi, how can our listeners connect with you, and where should they follow you?
Right. So where to follow me is well, follow me through Yes, of course. So Yes has got a very active social media and media program, and you can contact me directly at Ravi at yesforyouth.coza, the number four, or the Youth Employment Service. You can connect to me that way. And what we're looking for, as I say, yes, it's a public-private partnership, right? It's the public-private partnership that's getting talented young people uh, from disadvantaged backgrounds to get opportunities and go forward into the private sector and this greater economy to have an impact. So that means we really depend on partnerships from corporates or institutions that work in the impact space. So whether you're a CEO or CFO or someone who's a good mentor who really is keen on the future and shaping young minds and building new industries or whatever it is, we're very keen to have you there. You don't have to be a funder. Of course, we take a lot of funding, but we also look at who the funding goes to because we also then co-fund other companies in that sector. Sometimes I get money out of the mining sector, and some of that mining money we might reposition to green hydrogen companies. Could be building the new from the old, you know? So you might be, oh, I need, I'd love to have people, come and work with us from graduate school, but, in my new companies, it could also be that. Or it could be people who are doing SME training or whatever, something in the middle. We very focused on youth entrepreneurship. So anyone from the corporate side or corporate value chain side, we're very keen. Even if it is, Nick, associations have great ideas and networks. And so, look, I don't have money, but I'm a great networker, and we can look at something like that. Do again partner with a lot of public sector institutions. Often it's not that we need their money. In fact, generally we don't take public sector money, but we look at how do we partner to build new industries. And so we'll work with a lot of the business councils and different entities. So even now, we might do something with some of the public sector programs to ensure they have more new talent into the infrastructure building programs. Where all the people are going to work on carpentry and like electrical services or water technicians. So we do a lot of those partnerships. And the thing we're really trying to build out now is also on the international space. So we're doing a lot of work. So yes is a case study for the B20 in the coming G20. So they've decided that yes would be a good case study because it's one thing the private sector is doing in South Africa that they could showcase to the world. So we're starting to do more things with international exposure because we think there is a way to do more yes-like things in other countries, or yes is partnering with international organizations, bodies which want to have an impact. Because we are actually some of our systems, are working with our companies even as they go to Kenya, Rwanda, because they have their own uh, uh, programs for impact, but they can run off the same lessons they've learned out of the YES program. So we working with our companies who are in many cases multinational to take some of those lessons out. So all of those things, we're very happy. We just want good social impact leaders, good businesses, um, people who want to be on the right side of history, essentially from an impact point of view, to be able to collaborate, whether it's financial or non-financial. And because in the end, like I said, I think it's very much, a collaboration and a movement that builds the momentum. I mean, we see ourselves as a catalyst, not as the end of the story.
Right. And last but not least, Ravi, what is your message to the millions of learners out there who are looking to finish school this year, start a career, enter the world of work? What are maybe one or two success principles that they should keep in mind?
Right. So I would say that there there are lots and lots of opportunities, and the key thing is to be very resilient in that, in the sense that there will be lots and lots of rejections, and you have to continue plowing on. And one of the things that is becoming probably the most important thing we find is, to always be doing something. So, they talk about micro credentials. Do a course online. Some of those you can get from Coursera that are free, but it's a course out of Wharton Business School or whatever. Do it, right? Even if you can't get the paid for certificate. Uh, if there is a chance to work with someone, even if it's for free, they call it a micro job, but you put it on your CV. I helped Nick on his podcast for free. I did this little job, whatever. Because all of those things together begin to add up, and you will be learning things. Uh, the that you're actually building up the network because at some point Nick to you, hey, something's come up, but you are top because you always been doing stuff with me. I want you to do it. And I think that become because the days where you're going to start with a job and end with that same job. I mean, I think that's not my generation. That ended with my father's generation, and there's no way it's going to be there in the gym. Really, like I say, it's more the compass than the map now that is becoming important.
Thank you. Ravi, thank you so much for making time to share your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership. And I can see a book coming out sometime where you can hopefully share your many nuggets of wisdom.
Okay. Thanks very much, Nick. Glad to be here.